This was years ago, back when me and a group of close friends were all about 17 to 19. Some of us drove and others did not. To add some quick background, I've never experienced something like this before, and typically did not believe in the paranormal. I haven't experienced anything strange in the woods since, and I've continued to hunt and track and spend time outdoors. I have no explanation for the events that would occur on this night. On an August evening, a group of friends and I were sleeping in a small cabin out in the woods. The cabin was very old and run down, but was the only shelter from the weather. The cabin was actually owned by my best friend's father, who had the place for years and years, but was too lazy to do the proper upkeeping on it. Sure, it did the job, but it desperately needed some much love and TLC. The night started out like any other. We were sitting around the fire and telling stories. I can still remember the feeling of the fire. It was so warm and comforting. I thought nothing of it at the time, though. Anyway, we all go inside shortly thereafter, and around 9 p.m., the group of us went to bed. We were due to go scouting for good spots for deer stands the next day, and really wanted to get a good night of sleep. We were all very tired, so nobody was alarmed at the fact that we all went to sleep at the same time. After all, the drive up here was 3 hours, and I'm sure you know just how taxing long car rides can be mentally. Then, we didn't sleep so peacefully after that. 1 hour later, something had happened. I was awoken by a loud thud coming from the kitchen, followed by a scream. I immediately jumped from my bed and ran toward the kitchen. The rest of the group did the same, as we were all awakened and terrified as what was now happening. Whatever this was. My best friend and his father were in the kitchen, and both of them looked like they were terrified, staring wildly out the door. Sometimes, my friend's father would drop early in the morning and crash out in the main room, so it wasn't a surprise to see him here. We all asked both of them what was wrong and why they were screaming. Soon after, we heard the sound of something coming from the roof. All of us in unison turn our attention to the roof, and we can hear something very large walking across the cabin roof. Then, whatever it was, let out this terrifying screech. And I remember the exact sound as it was like a howl screeching, only 10 times louder. The screech was so loud and piercing, it hurt my ears, and I remember I had to cover them with my hands because it was painstaking. The screech was also very deep in pitch, and sounded like you took an owl and were choking the life out of it to get that noise. It was horrible. I can remember just looking at my friends and my friend's father, and we all had the same face of terror. Somebody says, "What the hell is that?" While somebody else asked, "Is that a Bigfoot?" Then, the screeching stopped, and we heard this loud thud, dropping from the roof, hitting the ground on the side of the cabin. It sounded like whatever weighed about 500 pounds dropped to the ground. It was heavy. But the screech continued on for another minute, and then it was silent. I remember having to force myself to leave the safety of the kitchen and walk out into the main foyer. I remember the cold and the moonlight shining in through the windows of the cabin. I remember the cold feeling in my body. Picture this. Be inside the middle of a horror movie, and just try to imagine how that feels. I think I could speak for all of us when we were overcome with dread and fear. After it went completely silent, my friend's dad opens the front door and shines his light out to look, and you could hear the night outside was so quiet. There was no crickets, no noise, no nothing. And keep in mind, this was in late summer. The forest is usually pretty alive at night. Crickets and sounds of nightlife. It was incredibly eerie, and we all had this lingering feeling like something really bad was going to happen. One of our friends, maybe in a moment of craziness or what suggested we all go outside together to find the source of that noise. And when I think most of us screamed at him, "Are you crazy?" I mean, even my friend's dad had a very concerned look on his face. He kept pacing back and forth, just saying, "This isn't good. No, this isn't good." Trying his best to keep us calm and in the cabin. He told us we all need to wait it out until morning, and we're going to have to cancel our hunting trip. Or our deer stand hunting trip, I should say. I don't know if he was more scared than we were, but his reaction was to force us to stay in the cabin until morning light. One of the friends in the group, maybe the craziest of all of us, decided that he was going to bravely go outside and look around in the dark to try and find the source of that noise. Apparently, he was convinced that this was nonsense, and he was going to prove it. He had one of those high-lumen flashlights. I tried. We all tried. We begged him not to go, but he was having none of it. So he frantically runs out the cabin like a madman, thinking he's going to be the Indiana Jones and be a hero and prove to us that it was nothing. Well, less than 5 minutes, he comes running back in the cabin, slamming the door shut, and he's screaming and pale as a ghost. He keeps saying really fast, "There's something outside. It's so big and it's walking around. I saw it." And he's pale, more pale than you'll ever get if you're sick. My friend's dad tried to comfort him to the best of his ability and redirect him to one of the small rooms in the cabin to try and further calm him down. We just kept the door locked that night and did our best to sleep, while others thought it would be best to stay up and keep watch. The rest of the night wasn't as eventful, but me, among a couple others who decided to stay up, kept hearing something really big walking around the cabin out in the dark. We were all too terrified to even dare shine our flashlights out there at whatever it was walking around. It honestly reminded me of the film Jeepers Creepers, honestly. It creeped me out. I have no idea how many other friends even managed to get any sleep, but somehow they pulled it off. My friend's dad was among us who stayed up all night and was with me to help keep watch and make sure that we were all safe. Now, as soon as about 5 a.m. hits and it was light enough, we all promptly grab our stuff and without much conversation at all, loaded up our car and off we went. We also woke the ones who were asleep, so don't worry, we didn't leave them behind. But we didn't want to waste any unnecessary time in that cabin more than we had to. This is where things get creepy, as if they aren't already. My friend's dad drove back in his car, and we drove and followed him. He told us that he would meet us all back at their house, since that's where we all met up the day before to load up and go. The 3 hours plus back seemed like a blur of time. Thoughts of the previous night would not stop replaying in my mind. We get back to the house, began unloading our stuff, getting ready to go into our separate vehicles, and so I start asking my friend's dad what he thinks it was. Was it a cougar? A Bigfoot? I mean, honestly, what did we experience last night? He seemed very hesitant to talk about it, but after some more prying, I got him to open up. He began telling us how he's ran into it before and he knows what it is. Then he asks us a very serious question, more serious than I have ever seen him in my life. Have you guys ever heard of a Wendigo? We had not. He explained to us further that it's some cannibalistic spirit that has taken the physical form and will stalk you if it finds you. One time, about 4 or 5 years ago, he was hunting up by the cabin, and he felt like he ventured a little too far to the west, where this thing's territory must have been, and claims that it followed him back to the same cabin where we were staying. It's like it had our scent and was waiting for us to come back to that cabin to show ourselves. Even just typing this out gives me the creeps. I can't stop reliving it. I'm not sure why it never tried to get into the cabin, but who knows? Maybe it would have stayed longer. Maybe it was looking for weak points. We're not sure. Who knows? Maybe is all I could ever ask. Anyway, believe me or not, that's what I experienced. It happened in May of 2008. I was camping in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta with my family and friends. There were about 20 of us in total in a place called Banff National Park. We were driven out of our campsite by some sort of animal. We suspect a bear, and we ended up in a place called Johnston Canyon. This was in the middle of the night, and there was a windstorm going on. The wind was howling, and it was raining, although lightly. There was some thunder and lightning on in the background, but not too much. My friend and I were sharing a tent, and at about 3 o'clock in the morning, we hear a noise that sounded like something walking around outside the tent. My friend told me to turn on my headlamp, so I did. I shone the light out of the tent, and I saw something moving around with the corner of my eye. I quickly turned my headlamp on it, and it startled and scared the living daylights out of me. Whatever it was about 8 feet tall, covered from head to toe in long, black, matted, nasty hair. It had these hollow, empty eyes that kind of glowed a dull yellow, and they illuminated from the light of the headlamp. It was staring at me. I tried to scream, but this thing was so ugly. It had a face that stuck out like a deer or maybe a dog, and even kind of had small little horns protruding on top of its head. Not like full-blown antlers, like a 8 or 9 or 10 rack deer would have, but this was more like little horns that you'd see a male buck having, like a little one. The face resembles more of a rotting skull with bits of tissue falling off it. I wouldn't notice though until afterwards, but this horrible odor of rotting meat lingered around our campsite for hours after the event. Once I shined my light into its face, it quickly lifted up its arm as if to shield its face from any kind of light, and kind of faded off into the obscurity of the darkness of the night. Either that or I turned away out of sheer terror and began screaming. My friend and I both saw it, and my behavior woke up pretty much everybody else. And so they're screaming at me through their tents, "What's going on? What did you see? What's wrong?" I told them right then and there, "Guys, there's something walking around our campsite that isn't an animal, and it's not human." I don't know what it was, but it scared me badly. After this, the rain came down pretty heavily, and so now we all just stayed put in our tents. Many of us went back to sleep, but my friend decided that we should try and stay up. Maybe keep an eye out in case this thing comes back. I did not have a weapon on me. I know, stupid, right? But my friend kept a Colt 45 with him at all times. He was always, and still is, a firm believer that if you're going to be hiking or out in the wilderness, you need to carry a powerful weapon in case you run into a dangerous situation and desperately need it. It seemed like after that thing left, the rain and storm intensified, as if its mere presence angered the storm. At some point in the morning, I passed out from sheer exhaustion and woke up sometime in the early AM. I think I was the first one up, and so I woke everybody, explaining we need to move now and not stick around, in case whatever that thing was decides to come back. I'm glad my friend stuck up for me and convinced my family and friends that I saw something, and that it's also verifiable and was not just a mistaken identity. They were convinced I saw something, although not sure what. We loaded up, packed out of there as quickly as we could. Now, moving forward in time, a little bit, I kind of forgot about the whole event, until months later. This same family friend and I are sitting down over a beer, and he brings up that time we saw that thing camping. I immediately remembered and had flashbacks to it. It scared me to even think about. He explained to me, "Yeah, I tried to do some research on what I think we saw. I'm pretty sure it's no Bigfoot. Did not look or act like one. It had to have been a Wendigo." To further tie things in, I recently found your channel and was reminded of this event again by the same friend telling me I should reach out to you for verification. Is this a Wendigo we saw, or something else? Me and my brother were hunting back in the foothills of Ohio when we found ourselves in a rather large, small cave. Driven by curiosity, we were no seasoned spelunkers, nor did we have the proper equipment to safely explore deeper. But we didn't care. We were young, on a thrill ride mission. So, let me explain to you how the cave looked. We were on a steep incline down a bunch of rocks, down to this cave opening, which was very large, but kind of bled into a smaller tunnel, which is why I say it was a small, large cave. It had a strange smell emanating from the cave, and the further down we got, the more terror we could sense. As we neared the bottom of this steep incline, my brother points to me and says, "Look at this." And to my horror, all along the bottom, where there were no rocks and it was flat, there were dead birds, like everywhere, all in varying states of decay. Some freshly dead, some completely rotted and skeletal, while others were in the process somewhere in between of rotting. You can just imagine the smell was just lovely. As we're trying to put together the pieces, why are there so many dead birds down here? It doesn't look like anything killed them. It looks like they just fell out of the sky and died here. We get this really bad feeling, like something is watching us from inside this cave. We should not continue onward. So we immediately turn around and start making our way back up. And as we do, the feeling does not lessen. It gets stronger and stronger. And so now we're moving faster and faster. And we get up the incline and we don't dare look back until we get well out of the opening or the mouth of the cave. We get back up to the top of this incline, and we both sense something dangerous is down there. We can both know it, we both feel it, and we're spooked. We're experienced outdoorsmen and woodsmen, so we know our way around. We're not amateurs, but we felt and know something was watching us. We should have never went down there. We turn around to look back into the cave, and as we do, this enormous, hulking shadow appears in the opening. We both say to each other at the same time, "What the hell is that?" As we watched in amazement, this humanoid shadow seemed to stretch and grow, its arms and head reaching out. Then it stops. It stands still at the opening, its body still hidden in the darkness. It's completely motionless and silent. We feel its body watching us. Then it starts to make a sound. It's a haunting, long, deep howl. It's guttural and coarse, and it carries deep into the air. It's a low moaning growl like a wild animal would make, and it gets louder and louder until it's louder than our own voices, just like we were talking. It's so loud now that it's echoing off the mountainside, bouncing across the hills. It's the most terrifying howl I've ever heard. It's like a wailing howl of pure desperation and hunger. There's something about it that's just so compelling and so very wrong. I can't even begin to describe how it sounded. It's something you have to hear for yourself. As it's echoing out this horrendous howl, me and my brother don't need any more time to decide that we need to get as far away from here as humanly possible. Let's just say we cut our day short, and we still talk about that day even now. It was hands down the scariest thing I've ever dealt with while in the thick of the woods. This was just last summer, in 2020. One summer night, my friend and I are sitting around a bonfire with other friends and noticed a strange, pale, and gaunt figure staring at us through the trees beyond. We didn't think much of it, as it looked somewhat human. We assumed it was some kid or young adult who perhaps had been drinking and stumbled into our campground. We ignored the figure for a while, but it kept staring at us. It was not particularly tall, but was very thin. It was wearing what appeared to be a torn, dark brown robe, and it had pale white skin with very long, dirty, stringy black hair hanging from its face. It had no facial features that we could see at the distance. At least, that may not stand out as alarming, as I'm probably making it sound. But that was at first. After a while, the figure disappeared from the trees, and my friend and I, Since we were the closest to the woodline, could hear something moving quickly in the woods coming in our direction. This made us both incredibly uneasy, as it would anybody. Quick note. This is where I have to insert a disclaimer that I'm not suggesting that what I saw was a Wendigo in fact. Also, I'm not trying to make a mockery of the idea of the Wendigo either. I merely want to share my own experience. I realize there's a lot of controversy surrounding the idea of Wendigos. If you don't believe in them, that's perfectly fine. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind, just share my story and be done with it. I have to tell you, this is the point in the story where I begin to question my own sanity. The next thing we knew, we can hear it behind us, and we both turn, and all of us around the bonfire now see this thing in full. The figure had appeared, and it was now very tall, at least 8 feet. Its hair was longer than we thought, very long, and it had very sunken-in features, emaciated and sickly looking. It clearly was not human, at least any that I'd ever seen, and it just stood there at the tree line, observing, watching. Several of us began screaming, running back towards the camp, while the others of us were downright frozen where we were standing. I do not know what my friend and I were doing. We were stuck in a state of perpetual shock. I remember turning and running, being so afraid that I was going to fall and this thing was going to grab me. I did not see or feel anyone behind me, but I only made it as far as the fire pit, and I stopped and turned to see what it was doing. It, to my horror, had begun running towards me, and was now very much taller and larger than I ever thought. It had singled me out and was charging me. I remember looking up at it when it was no more than a few feet away, and in that exact moment, it looked at me with these lifeless eyes. And somehow, I don't know, like some sort of paranormal phenomenon, its face had contorted and changed. It had no face. It was just a black void with eyes. I can't even begin to explain. I screamed and fell to the ground. I think my friend was screaming too, but it's a blur, to be honest. I don't remember. The next thing I do remember, I was sitting on the ground looking at my own hands covered in dirt and blood. When I look up, I was surprised to see my friend next to me, and he's looking around like crazy, trying to get me to go now before this thing comes back. I think I must have blacked out for a moment or two because it's like my brain just lapsed that moment of time completely out of my memory. Just like a voided check. We were all 15 or 16 at the time, so we make it back to camp. Everybody's freaking out, crying, telling our parents what we had seen. They listened and tried their best calming everybody down, trying to prove there's nothing spooky out in the woods. We have no reason to fear, and probably just saw a deer. But I tried convincing them, or at least I tried, that there was something there. We all saw it, and there's no denying that. They weren't really buying it, so I just gave up after a while and kept it to myself. I know it might sound very strange, and I want you to bear with me through these feelings, but I strongly feel that whatever I saw that night somehow attached itself to me, or marked me in some way. I don't know how to explain or describe my feelings. It's like it marked me. I feel different. Not just about my sighting, but I physically feel different. Like this thing is a part of me now. I haven't felt right ever since this happened, and I don't know who I can talk to about it, to be honest. My parents and family don't want to hear about it, and my friends listen to me, but there's not much they can do. Understandably so. What do you think happened? Can you provide me with some answers? Thank you.